So glad to have you here at Creating Zola Mondays.
Yay.
I am Linda James Myers, and we have our crew with us today, JoJo Hickson and Robina Onwong'a and Evan Auguste and Thomas Gordon. It is such a great time for us because it's time for us to hold up the light, and we held the light up. Oh my God, did we hold up the light when we voted and put our former president out of office, although he won't admit he's out of office, but just real happy about that. And I think the reason that's relevant, and I wanted to mention it today in particular because we're talking about spirituality and religion, is that we as people of African descent in America, particularly non-immigrant Africans in America, have always been the moral and spiritual leaders of this country. And as a consequence, we have held up the light, and we have always been the people who tried to create the environment to bring this nation to the best that it said it wanted to be, a democracy. So real happy about that, celebrating that as we talk about spirituality and religion. One of the things we know is that when it comes to African spirituality, there's been a lot of misinformation, miseducation, because of the attempt to interpret Western cultural traditions from Western eyes. That does not work because they're two very different realities. So happy you're joining us today so we can continue this discussion of spirituality and religion. One of the things that seems to be true is that almost everything that is of an African belief system has been demonized and misinterpreted. And as a consequence, then we have to clarify, because really the roots of all major religions begin in classical African civilization. So acknowledging that, I would like to turn to the rest of our panel today and see what thoughts they'd like to share.
You're on mute, Dr. G.
All right. I was just going to say, as we share our thoughts, thank you, Linda, Dr. Myers, for kicking it off. Let's just say a word about who we are in case the audience is, we're not familiar to the audience, some of the members. So I'm Dr. Tom Gordon, based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I'm a developmental psychologist with a industrial organizational practice, focusing on leadership solutions to our challenges. Who else is joining me today?
Great idea, Dr. D, to introduce ourselves. In fact, I might have said my name, but not much beyond that. I'm a past president of ABPsi, as well as on their Council of Elders, Elder of Elder Emeritus. I am also a clinical psychologist by training, and probably most known for developing a theory of optimal psychology and a psychoeducational approach called belief systems analysis.
Okay. Robina.
Hey, I'm Robina Onwong'a. I am a PhD candidate. I study counseling psychology, and I am currently the communications chair for the student circle. And I'm gonna popcorn Evan.
Hey, I'm Evan Auguste. I am the current student circle chair. I'm also the co-chair for the Sawubona Healing Circle Initiative. Also in line with what Nana Linda just said, we also held incredible spaces during the election, the extended election process, that gave people the opportunity to talk through some of the racial trauma they've been battling in the years prior, and we were talking about how to build forward. So those were beautiful healing spaces, and we were blessed to have JoJo came through, and Nana Linda also led us in libations. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you, and I think that's perfect in line with what we're talking about spirituality and religion and how we can use that to build forward. So JoJo, you're up.
Thanks. I'm always so glad to go after your tangents. So My name is JoJo Hickson. I'm a third year clinical PsyD student at the Chicago School of Professional Psychology. And I work with the social media virtual impact team here at the ABPsi. And I'm super excited for Zola. I hate Mondays, but anytime we have these, I always look forward to them. So.
Yeah, Monday's a hard day, I think, for most people. Actually, more suicides on Monday than any other day of the week. So we thought Zola Monday might be a good time to bring forth the light. As you know, or may not know if you're just tuning in for the first time, Zola really has to do with love and peace and tranquility and productivity, coming to us from the Bantu languages of Kikongo and Zulu, and letting us know that we have powerful forces within us. And if we share those forces, if we wield Zola, then we can uplift not only ourselves, but one another, and ultimately the entire humanity. It's so very much needed at this time.
And to add to that, Dr. Myers, I would say, I want to underscore the holding of space for us to stack our capabilities and share our power. And I would like the audience to appreciate that we've created on this panel a cross-gender and cross-age conversation. And I go back to what you said, that so much of the energy of people who've been anti-African and anti-life has been put into demonizing systems that guide us to really be connected and kind, compassionate, and productive with each other. So I appreciate the introduction to the word Zola, which is a deeper form of love than what we're used to thinking about. But I really appreciate, and even on tough Mondays, I get excited about the cross-generational conversation that often we are not holding space for, or we're too impatient to actually cultivate the conversation. So very glad to be with you today and be a part of it.
Excellent. Very appreciative of all generations, and these young folk really energized. So happy they're here and committed. And as older folk, it lets me know, I can rest in peace should that time come, because I know future generations got it covered. So thanks so much for this opportunity. One of the things that came to my mind when you were talking, Dr. G, is this whole notion of epigenetic memory. Might be a big word, but pretty much it means that as Western science has come to understand, our DNA holds memories. And typically they talk about those memories as epigenetic memory, and they focus on the trauma, the epigenetic trauma that people carry forward across generations. But today I want us to think about the epigenetic liberatory force, the spiritual forces and powers and insight that also come to us in our DNA. And I actually am convinced that that's what allowed us as people acknowledging African ancestry and kidnapped and trafficked to the Americas to build this nation's wealth and that of our captors. That's what allowed us to transcend 250 years of the most brutal form of enslavement ever practiced in the history of humankind, and come out after that the moral and spiritual leaders of this nation. So in our DNA is a spiritual knowledge, wisdom, and understanding that if we can kind of let go and suspend belief in some of the beliefs and worldview of our captors, we will really, really, really be rewarded.
It's interesting to me, and maybe that will jumpstart our conversation about religion and spirituality and thinking about ultimate concerns, when you say our captors and our memory of something pre-captivity. It's fascinating. It makes me curious as to how that would get carried on. And you just suggested one mechanism, but I'm not sure the audience is familiar with a lot of what we were interested in and thought about and documented and shared pre-current captives. And as John Henry Clark used to say, religion per se is often the handmaid, typically the handmaiden of conquerors and captives. So I like your initial alert that we have to be careful about swallowing whole, unexamined, and digesting something that captors have given us, as opposed to really going to source and thinking about what happened pre-captivity.
I was going to hop in and also add to that dimension is the idea that, kind of like Nana Linda introduced, to what degree captors could actually give us necessarily anything, right? Because a lot of the religions and the spiritualities that are commonly practiced were developed and were based in a lot of like Central, Eastern Africa in particular, right? Like when you look at like the migration patterns, how people took things like Christianity, religions like Islam, and have rich traditions like dating like millennia back of, right, like developing and contributing to these religions. And I think there was a period of time, right, when you had European people specifically take those religions and say like, this is ours, we did this, and we're going to give these to you, right, and attempt to root out maybe some of the African influence, but you can't because it's like so entrenched in the ideas itself. And so that's something I think I've noticed in some conversations, right, is that desire to rid yourselves of everything that the quote unquote captor gave or indoctrinated, when it's like, no, like even the ideas that they're saying that are their own, we've been so collected as a people, connected as a people, that that there's no idea that's purely like absent of that influence of our ancestors. So I think that's always something, it was cool for me to learn, and I think it's like cool to have at the table also.
Absolutely. Particularly when you look at the African roots of Christianity and virtually every major religion. One of the things that that comes to mind, and I know we mentioned in our earlier conversations, is the whole notion of voodoo or vodou. And I just wanted to put out here that its role in the Haitian Revolution was essential to overcoming the French and the British and everybody else. And they're still having to pay for it because they won. That's not the way it usually rolls in modern civilization. If you're not the winner, usually you're not the one penalized. But in this instance, the Haitians were, and unfortunately, this nation's done nothing about rectifying that injustice. But just want to shout out to the people who so love nature. Their basic belief system is around nature. And I know you have Haitian background. Evan, if there's anything you'd like to share.
Oh man, are you kidding me? I've been waiting for it. Oh man. No, I think I guess in this regard, I think I personally, right, I spent the last, I would say maybe 5 years, like really 4 or 5 years really getting to learn and to know a little bit more about voodoo, right? Because as I was raised in the US, Robina sending me a text. I grew up in the US, and a lot of what I learned about voodoo was it was like this black magic. It was like Haitian evil. It's how people do possessions. And you look at Haitian voodoo influence on American culture, pretty much the only thing America has seen as being valuable is the idea of the zombie, right? The zombie monster. If you are a fan of any of that genre, the zombie originates from Haitian voodoo, right? It was initially used to kind of depict like almost like an ultimate nightmare, right? That even in death you could still be captive, right? And people have kind of taken that, Americans have kind of taken that and made it into like a I want to say like a freedom dystopian society fantasy. But what I learned, like going back in reading texts, Baba Wade Nobles has done so much great work there also. Is there so much more, like you mentioned, like so much more rich information and legacy and tradition there that I think people will be benefit from knowing, but it's been so stigmatized. One of the things personally, and I did end up publishing a paper on Haitian Vodou in mental health, is the idea that we think of Freud as being the one who developed like a tripartite mind, like the id, ego, and superego. And you go back, you look at Haitian Voodoo, and like, no, people already had this idea before Freud, right? The idea that the mind was in several parts between the soul and the spirit that connected people and the self, right? And so there's so much rich information that's already available in these different cultural traditions that have been stigmatized, right? And I think it would do us well to, again, like go back, like Dr. Gordon was mentioning, go back and like look at them and see what value it has been overlooked.
Can people access your paper? Is it online, or how would it be made available?
Of course you can. You can Google. It's It's Haitian Voodoo for Mental Health, and it's published with the in Global Mental Health. Right, so go check that out.
I think I found it. I just dropped the link to them in the in the chat, because if you weren't going to bring it up, I was.
You have a kind of Cliff Notes version of the essence of your paper. What were you trying to share in that investigation that is beneficial for the liberation of the African mind and by extension all humanity?
Yeah, so I think one of the things I was very much interested in, right, is when people think about, I had a conversation with a friend the other day, when we think about religion, I don't want to say especially our generation, but it's common conversation among our generation, is it could be like a divisive force, right? It's this thing that separates people, it's this thing that prevents people from considering maybe traditional science and traditional scientific methods. It forms like a divide, right, between like your more conservative people and your people that might be more progressive. And what the paper looks at is saying, like, no, if you actually look at the available research that's been done, if you talk to the people that are there, people have, and that's the nature of Haitian Voodoo, is it has a history of being integrated into different belief systems, into different scientific understandings. You have people practicing Haitian Voodoo for environmentalism, right? You have people practicing Haitian Voodoo to rid the country of things like transphobia and various bigotries like that. And you have people using Haitian Voodoo in accordance with different types of medicines and psychology, right? And so one is there's this idea that it forms like a boundary between all these other understandings. When you look at that very nature of it, right, it was the melding of all of these spiritualities and religions from these distinct nations that came together to lead to like one of the greatest liberations that we've seen in history, right? So its basis is in connection. And people use that still to arrive at a divide because of the way it's been stigmatized. And so that's one of the core things there, is that no, this is a spirituality, it's a religion, it's a philosophy that can serve to integrate all the belief systems, as opposed to people trying to throw it out because, again, it's this Black religion, and it's been so stigmatized in its history. So that's one of the central things I tried to get across.
Fantastic. I think that's so important because African belief systems typically aren't couched as religion. They are belief systems, and it's the way we approach the world. And nature's always a key part of traditional African belief systems, as well as connection to one another and ancestors and future generations. So we see that carry over in the West, in Haiti, coming from Benin and Western Africa, and just being proliferated all over the world. So such powerful. So glad you did that paper, Evan.
Yeah, I'd like to co-sign that and just say you also are holding up the light with deep inspection of something that gets disqualified or demonized. You're saying that the actual foundation of it embraced integrating into oneness many aspects of things, and it got stigmatized. So I think there's a great takeaway from that, what spaces are we holding to teach people to do deep inspection, because the presentation of something has already been packaged for disqualification and demonization. So it's very interesting that concepts like the Trinity, get elevated as Freud thought of it, but really it goes back to our ancient classical African civilizations of man, woman, child, thought, word, deed. And all these things are foundational, but the captor certainly doesn't want you to have space to inspect and look at deep structure. So I'm wondering if we can toss out a question and keep this conversation building about what do we think was going on that made voodoo so powerful for the Haitian Revolution? What was the functional use of it? Because of course conquerors are going to say gender is divisive. Everything's divisive, but it's not really that it's inherently divisive. It's how people are using it. And as you started off, Dr. Myers, reminding us that people did have a revolution in this side of the world against European powers, and that was a key force for that revolution. I wonder if we can dissect it as to what was really the reason that force got so strong. What were people actually using it? I'm interested in the ideology and the human use of it. And it's not just not the oppressor that's using it. We're also using it as well. So I wonder what do people think about either the historical use of it or currently, why is it so powerful? These belief systems, quote, some of them are organized as religion. They still are attractive. If you do surveys, you find that 95, 96% of the country is still identifying with something. So what do we think is the function of it as psychologists? What's really going on, either in the Haitian Revolution or now? I'm sure the grad students don't get that in their class. You know, that kind of question about the uses and abuses of ideology.
I think one of the strengths of African belief systems is its lived tradition. So that dichotomization between theory and practice, not so much in African cultural worldview and tradition. So it's a challenging question because we come to it from, well, how do we make practical, or how does it manifest? When you're seeing the world as spiritual material unity, then lived tradition isn't dissected in the same kind of way. But in response to your question, more specifically, when it comes to the Haitian Revolution, I was at invited to lecture, and one of the other lecturers was a dancer who taught us the dance that the Haitians used when they were getting ready to go to war. It was a very spiritual dance, and I won't show you now, but you could feel the energy. You could literally feel that spiritual power and energy enter your body as you engaged in this dance and the drums.
Great takeaway. So you named one element. You're saying that the foundational belief system was not that of the oppressor. It was theirs, and they used it to sponsor cohesive and connecting rituals like music and dance that revved up their power.
Yes.
This is no accident that in the British United States Episcopalian Anglican Church model, they outlawed the dance and outlawed the gathering with the drums and outlawed the use of the indigenous people's ways of connecting and reinforcing their power. The Spanish sort of tried to assimilate it in their enslavement strategies, but the British actually said it's too dangerous. We can't have people gathering and actually using, I love the Zola word because now you're taking an English word like love, but you're changing it. You're not accepting the English version of it. And it sounds like the Haitians didn't either. How could you overthrow the conqueror and use their same belief system? And I love the dance analogy because that's very practical. I'll tell you another thing I think the captors gave us. They gave us a day off. So back to lived experience, I think if you're captive and somebody's got a gun in your face, a whip at your back, and they're saying they're going to beat you or give you a day off, I think that people do show intelligent adaptation. They will start taking the surface concepts and keep their deep structure. And I think they brought their deep structure, which is part of what you're saying, Dr. Myers, about we don't separate, one thing from the other. And I think the deep structure is we feel an intimate connection with that which we can't see. That's the deep structure. Then somebody puts on top of it a proxy representation called the white Jesus and a day off. And I think there you got an interesting combination. I don't want to be killed, beaten, shot, maimed, and I'm gonna get a day off. And some people start signing up. I think at first Christians were probably people that were very African in their deep structure, but interested in a practical accommodation.
Although I'm not sure the enslaved Africans got a day off. You might have got an hour off together. But I do get your point, and it's absolutely correct.
So what in your lived experience, Robina, JoJo, and people of your generation, what's the pull? What's the equivalent of Nana Linda's dance moment where she was invited into something? What do you think's going on inside of either spiritual spaces named that way or religious spaces named that way What are people hungry for, looking for? And as Dr. Myers said, you can feel the power of those spaces. So I'm wondering, do you sense that in any spiritual or belief systems that you're aware of, or any spaces that identify themselves that way?
That's a really good question. I don't have a full answer right now, so I might have to circle back to it. But there's just so much that you all are saying that I'm like processing and also like, oh yes, like I've had thoughts like that before, but haven't been able to actually like put them into words or make sense of it. And so something that I'm thinking of, it kind of goes back to what JoJo said in the part one of this, where she talked about how in our generation, it almost seems like young folks are piecing together parts of different religions as we know it to kind of create spiritual practices that resonate with them. And I feel like a big part of it is, from my perspective, trying to move in a way to where we don't feel like judgment or judged or chastised for how we choose to practice, because a lot of us in the US have grown up knowing of, maybe even if we're not religious, knowing of Christianity, or knowing of just like those, I think like more of the Abrahamic religions. And so now I think being in spaces where we have friends or individuals on social media who we don't even know, but we follow, who challenge some of the beliefs that we have. It's like we're learning from each other and being able to sit and think about the root of some of these things and how they can relate to us, and how things aren't just black and white. So like some of the stuff that Evan has said, like when I first read his article, I didn't know a lot of those things. And it brought up thoughts for me of like how I've been miseducated about these things within different spaces. And it makes me think about, you know, just the tangible example you gave, Dr. G, of how they stripped the Africans of their drums and those melodic things that kind of help them to invoke like that, I don't know, like spiritual stuff in them, because they were scared that they were going to use those or be able to really tap into who they are, which I think, going back to the question that you had first asked about what kind of contributed to the revolutionary liberation, is that they were really able to be, or they weren't scared to tap into themselves. Like with these practices now where with these practices now where you know, we're kind of just like doing it to survive, or I can't remember the phrase that you used, but not taking that the deep part of it, but more so being like, I'll take this because these are the things that we were kind of taught, or using our oppressors' traditions and rituals to help us get by. Those are not things that people who were present during the Haitian Revolution were really trying to do, because that wasn't going to get them out of their situation. So I think that's kind of what I think of for me. And then the last thought that connects to that, which we can tap into a little bit later, but it makes me think of how we demonize a lot of these traditional religions and traditional rituals and religions. And you already said that. And I know that Dr. G, you were going to do some research on what the whole demonic or demons thing is, but I'd be interested for us to get a little bit more into what that is, like why we say things are demonic, or why certain religions feel the need to say that certain practices in other religions are demonic.
I know, I appreciate your comments, and that you were dancing in real time, so you didn't sit and wait to have it all prefabbed and formulated, and I think it was very, very rich. You could see Nana Linda actually moving as she was talking about how it felt to be in that situation. So part of what you're saying is tapping into our deep selves enough to join the dance.
That's what I love so much about what you said, Robina, because if you think about humanity as a whole, African people experienced the worst of humanity. Our leges were stripped from us, our drums, everything, every external, every surface structure, human characteristics was denied us. We couldn't speak our language, our dress, our diet. even families were separated. Yet that spiritual power that was within us, we were forced to go within and pull it up to transcend. And that's, to me, as a psychologist, the most amazing thing. I consider non-immigrant Africans in America, being those who were kidnapped and trafficked to the Americas, as the miracle of modern times.
And I just want to pull something that someone said in the chat. Mary, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, so I'm sorry. But she said, also, Robina, in last session, Nana Linda, you shared that many African descendant individuals did not choose Christianity, but it was chosen for them so that they could have a moment of social time or freedom to connect with family and not have to continue the work. So just pulling in like the idea of choices.
Absolutely true. JoJo, you're awfully quiet.
I was just thinking about everything that people was saying, and what I think is that a lot of the times the human experience is based on meaning making and trying to make sense of things, and a lot of us have several existential crises all the time. And so I think that religion kind of serves as a foundation from which we can make sense of the world and all the things that we don't know about. It kind of gives us something to pull from when we're facing the unknown. And so I think that what happened when we were trafficked to America is that white people probably saw the power that was coming from African spirituality, and they didn't know how themselves they could connect with like other things like the nature, or not the nature, but nature, or higher beings, or each other. And so they had to find a way to kind of make that smaller, and like you said, Nana Linda, cut us off from all the things that that keep us resilient and make our spirits strong in the face of like all the stuff that we face. And so I think that religion kind of was created by white people to limit our spirituality, if that makes sense.
Well, certainly the so-called founding fathers wrote about it, the necessity to use religion to cut us off from our spiritual, cultural traditions. It was intentional.
You muted, Dr. G.
Yeah, as you would expect with a conqueror's agenda, you would use every means available because it's expensive and costly to just keep a gun or a sword in front of somebody's face. You actually want them to cooperate with their own containment. And in the United States, historically, there were years in which there were over 100 revolts and rebellions and resistance demonstrated against captors. And there were conferences by conquering white people that said, we got to figure out more strategies. So everything evolves, including evil and things that are anti-life. And people got together and decided, what are some ways we can begin to contain people from all of this energy? And I wish we did have a photo of Dr. Myers remembering that Haitian moment, because yeah, you could feel like, I'm not sure if it's DNA stored, but we do need memory. It's still an open question to me about how much is DNA, and we got all kind of bloodline mixtures now. But I do look at her shaking like that, and I say, yeah, I can see where you could overturn slavery if you got enough people together shaking like that, and then deciding that for all of those, all of that energy, we have to channel it. And we have to stay united. And I love the concept of somebody, you just said it, somebody just said it, that you can't use the oppressor's deep, the oppressor's not that deep, but the oppressor's ideology and framework in order to free yourself. You know, you really do have to reach for something different. I'm not sure it's carried by the cells so much as it's carried by, I do think memory is a part of it. Somehow you have to have, the takeaway for me is that one takeaway is the deep structure is we are because we're connected. And I think you do have to have something that reminds you that even in times of uncertainty, when you don't know what's going on and you don't know you can make it, you're connected to something greater than yourself. I think that's the deep structure. And then people can come along and say, okay, off of that hard wiring, we'll give you some software. And the software will have a white Jesus in it that looks like us, and you'll bow down. And to me, it's like learning a language is deep structure. Any child can learn any of the world's 3,000 languages very quickly. But then somebody's got to expose the surface, particular vocabulary and alphabet. And then I think you find people basically trying to survive and thrive. So just piecing together a lot of this, we're trying to figure out what's the functions of all these belief systems. One, we're dealing with handling uncertainty. Two, I think we're dealing with the human power that comes from connection. And people are looking and starving for it. So then they turn to the latest person that's selling them a system to connect with.
Robina, I think you said one of the listeners had a comment.
Yeah. So what Dr. G has said has also brought up a few thoughts for me. So one thing that you mentioned made me think of movement, and there's like this banter. Not every Black person, is able to like dance, but that's something that's within our body, like rhythm and being able to like connect. You feel a beat, you just catch it, and people just move in that way. So that's something that I think of that. You can't really necessarily explain it, but the comment that connects to that I saw is Iris said, I'm not aware of any spiritual or religious spaces. This is back to the question that you asked earlier, Dr. G, but many art spaces are this way. So it's the spaces that we have maybe in our generation that kind of make us feel spiritually connected. And I totally agree with that comment, because I think that, as someone who I'm not able to engage in it as much because of grad school taking up so much time, but being in creative spaces or being able to write, like JoJo and I being able to create graphics for the organization, those are ways that I feel like I'm able to just not have to think too much about the spaces that I'm in or how I'm adjusting in those spaces, but I'm just being able to like express what's within me. And sometimes I'm not able to like explain how I come to finding inspiration for certain things or making certain things like come to life, but it just happens. And I think that's what it is. It kind of goes back to what we've talked about, and we've referenced Dr. Joy's post-traumatic slave syndrome references, but in there she talks about how we're able to, she references sawubona, so how we're able to see each other. And then there's also this phrase where it's like, for Black people, we talk about how we feel, like I feel you, or I get you. It's more of like talking about our, not necessarily something that, I don't know how to say it, but you can't explain it. You just kind of you connect to something that's within the other person. And then this ties into the phrase that we kind of discussed before about Ubuntu. And for me, when I think of Ubuntu, this is also part of it. It's, I am because you are. And Nana Linda, I'll let you talk a little bit more about the original kind of phrasing of it. But the way that I've interpreted it as well is that I don't know about the, epigenetic DNA, but I do believe that that's something that's helping to hold me and helping to hold my siblings and my people, because the things that have gone on, even within this year, I mean, that's something that is meant to take people out. But in some way, we were still able to make it to November and still be mobilizing and supporting each other in different ways. And so I think there's something to be said about the connection that we have to our ancestors who were so resilient enough to make it here. And even the ones who decided that they wanted to kill themselves. I can't remember what that saying is that Killmonger says in Black Panther, but like, bury me with my ancestors who basically like jumped ship because they were like, it'll be better for them to die than to have to live this life. And even those who went through and lived this life, I think that they left something for us to be able to continue the movement.
Thanks so much, Robina. I think the key for me is Zola, because everything is energy, electromagnetic energy, even our cells, even the material realm is energy. It's just slowed down enough to be concretized in our senses can appercept it. So the idea of the separation between the spiritual aspect and the material aspect is a fallacious notion imposed upon us as we've adopted the cultural deep structure of our captors. And I think that when we free ourselves up enough to be exposed to the truth of reality, one of the things we'll see is that we are interconnected and interdependent. And as we think about Zola as that love, as that peace and tranquility that leads to productivity. Another way to think about productivity is creativity. So that it's not surprising to me at all that younger people are seeing and experiencing that spiritual aspect in the artistic spaces. Because in traditional African culture, the role of the arts is to elevate the consciousness of the people. And so opportunities to create space to elevate that consciousness are very powerful and very spiritual. So as we turn to the lens of our ancestors and see the world as very much interconnected, and there's not an aspect of humanity and nature and all that is that's not interconnected through this energy. But it's kind of like being on the right wavelength. So all the energy's out there. What channel are you going to be on? Are you going to be on the fear, anxiety channel? Or are you going to shift to the more optimal, joyful, connecting with that divine Ngola energy, the one that is actually the light and the supreme being, that spirit? So we have that power, we have those choices, and we just, I think on creating Zola Mondays, want to create the space for people to begin to think about those tremendous ancestors and understandings that we as African people brought to humanity, and go back to them, because what our captors have given us is not sustainable, and it's on its decline. Yay! Oh, I'm sorry.
You know, just to dance with you on that concept for a moment, I'm thinking of the power of what you just said, because all human groupings have official creation stories, and they talk about, you know, their beginnings. What you just said, Donna Leonard, is so powerful, because you just said every moment of every day is a creation moment and a creation opportunity. And in some spaces are officially called artistic, where we literally sponsor, encourage, and invest in people displaying some of human genius in creative expressions, whether it's paint, music, poetry, etc. And I was just thinking about that. Wow, if we take what you just said, if that's really our deep structure, that we're co-creating every day, and sometimes we have drums and music, but other times we don't, then maybe we could talk a little bit more about what in our lived experience actually accelerates and amplifies us feeling connected, and therefore more powerful, and therefore more beneficial to life. And I was thinking of something today, I know it personally, and it also happened to me this week. The power of having some people in your life that care about you, and they care enough to show you that you don't have to be perfect, but that you are connected with them even when you're not. And that signal coming back to you is like that drum, or that drum rhythm. I love your analogy, Lyndon, your verb about channels, because it said you don't ever have to sit and stay in depression. You can change the channel. You could choose to be around some people that will feed you something positive to say that you're worthy. So the two examples this week that came to me, a therapist, PhD student, but therapist, came to me for therapy this week. And he said, I'm so down, but I'm reaching out. And he didn't know the word Zola, but he's basically saying I'm reaching out for somebody who will strike a drum beat or send me some love. And I said, well, what tripped you? And he said he was always been at creative events. And I think that is something about young people, because this person was about the same age as our panelists. And he said, I'm always used to creative space being space where we suspend toxic judgment and we allow people to share their gifts. And there's generally applause and there's general affirmation and gratitude. He said he went to a space, open mic, poetry jam. He shared some of his poetry and no one clapped. No visible sign of I am because we are. I see you, you see me. It was none of that energy in the room. And he said it just tripped him up. And he needed to reconnect. And I think that's some of the power of what you just said, that practically speaking, we may get disconnected for a moment, it seems like that, or tripped up, but the real deal is being able to co-create another moment with some people where you can actually change the channel. So they don't push it in grad school. Nobody asked the question that Tony K. Bambara asked in the book called Salt Eaters, do you really want to heal? And if you really want to heal, what is at the basis of the healing? I think you're talking about some love energy, Zola energy, gratitude, acceptance, validation, whether you have the drums and the music or not. We got to stop this toxic judgment of each other when we get together in spaces. I like the person that wrote in because they're saying art space feels like spiritual space. And I think part of the reason is people don't judge it and make it right or wrong in most instances. This week I had an exception. And in a matter of moments, that person shifted the channel. So they were back and ready to start being of assistance to their people and the world. Some days are like that. Anybody had those days where you need to shift the channel?
I had a comment. I think that a lot of the downfalls of religion are like the indoctrination is that there's this idea that there's a book or a set of rules that you have to follow. And if you don't go to a specific place that's a building, that's a church, or if you don't follow a specific set of rules, then you're not going to be able to meet some promised land. And I think that with African spirituality, especially with our focus on like the arts and rhythm, there's a component of healing, like in art spaces or in other spaces, in spaces that would not be considered religious. And I think that as someone who does poetry, that's where a lot of my healing takes place. And I can attest to the fact that you can definitely meet God or whoever you believe in when you're indulging in your art and your craft. And so
you redefine religion as our spiritual engagement as of meeting God, meeting source and connecting with source. And you don't need somebody's book and perfect laws to do it. Very interesting. And the so-called book was outlawed to give it more value in people's minds. They wouldn't let the people have it, and most people weren't literate. So until there was a printing press and they actually made some efforts for people to be more literate, the book got artificial elevation and went through various iterations. As Dr. Myers mentioned in previous sessions, conquerors were very interested in playing around with the language, the story, the characters, and they had various commissions to do this. So the book is not a static concept. I'm interested in, back to voodoo, just to connect the point. Evan, what do you think is this function in voodoo of the boogeyman? And I grew up down south and they would teach you about the boogeyman and the zombie and this other world is going to come back and somehow harass you or get you. What do you think is the function of that in a spiritual system, that bad things await you or may be horrible out there for you? You can even see in classical African civilization stories where your heart is weighed on a scale with a feather.
Yeah.
And depending on the balance, the preponderance of evidence about what kind of life you've held, the story goes that you could be eaten by a vicious animal like a crocodile or a lion versus move on to the journey in the life beyond your skin.
Yeah, I had two thoughts with that in mind. Exactly, is I guess how I understand it from either like traditional Christianity or voodoo, whatever it might be, is to the overall conversation that we're talking about, I feel like the source of the inspiration for that boogeyman creature, whatever that might be, is to show, or I guess to ward people off, kind of, to use our terminology, like disrupting like our collective channel, right? Whatever it might be in most books and in most philosophies, religions, those boogeymen come up because people are doing things that are out of accordance with the group good, right? It's not because anybody's doing things like individually, not always, we can't point with such a bigger brush, not always, right? Are doing things that are individually maybe frowned upon, but it's things that disrupt like the group good. People are stealing from the community. People are teaching children in the wrong way, and those are the things that will often be weighed heavily and be torn down. And to the other point that I was thinking about in light with what we were saying is when we have these group collective disruptions from our channels, I guess I was reflecting on, and it was brought up in one of the Sawubona healing circles actually, the strength of also not always returning to the same type of channel, but also our ability to find new channels that respond to the moment that we're in. And I was reflecting in this Zola Monday is exactly that, right? I don't know for a fact that we would have this kind of collective conversation where we're engaging people on Facebook, we're engaging commenters, ourselves, without like necessarily the pandemic, right? It's a new type of connection space that we're sharing with each other because we're seeking to create Zola in a new context. I think that's one of the strengths of it, right? It's a reshaping, re-emerging. There's a dog scratching on my door. It's not my dog. Like energy, right? That seeks to promote love in that way. And I think that's one of the, again, like beautiful things in general, but beautiful things about this space that we're sharing together, that we endeavor to do that.
I love what you said, Evan, because in the wisdom tradition of African deep thought based on optimal theory, the purpose of negativity in human experience is growth. It's our opportunity. So the demons or whatever that negative energy is you want to talk about has come as an opportunity for growth and for edification, to bring us closer to our true selves as divine spirit beings. And when we think of it that way, when we get sucked into the negative, it's not the worst horrible thing, it becomes an opportunity. That challenge, we face it, we master it, we come back to even a deeper, fuller understanding and appreciation of who we are and what we are as divine beings. So I guess my takeaway there would be always realize that as bad as it looks, including COVID, there's some good that's come out of it. Even as bad as and horrific as chattel caste enslavement has been, we are here triumphant this afternoon talking about and reflecting on and moving beyond any negative that could have been put forward. So that's the purpose in my mind's eye of negativity in human experience, and it becomes an opportunity. And I would say that everyone, there is one channel that will always take you there, and that's gratitude. Just keep that gratitude channel open to the Most High, and that'll just kind of clear up all the static.
Beautiful. You're moving into takeaways, and wow, what a channel to operate off of, because one of my takeaways from that is no matter what you're facing, take away that you have the opportunity to know this challenge and therefore to actually use it as a stimulant and a catalyst and a portal for you to continue your journey to understand yourself and by extension to connect with other people. I think another takeaway in this society is that we are so interested in spaces that are easy gratification. You see people take a cell phone and take a selfie, and they're in a group and they're all taking selfies. And I was thinking, how many people are in religious or spiritual spaces where they're actually doing what Evan said, which is, can we update the philosophy to its modern application? Because all is dynamic. All is energy, all is mind, it's all frequency, but people actually try to take static and they try to make concepts static. And then they butter you up with you're somehow got a sail on and you can be connected with this arena and it's all static. The original word for salvation comes from a word that actually means butter. It's an oil that was used to heal wounds. So when people are buttering you up, they're not necessarily saving you. They're actually selling something to you. And it's not a channel that is actually going to help you get authentic about who you really are. It's often is a channel that deals with intermediaries who want your mind and your loyalty and your money. So this is some of what we can take away from today, that if you follow the script, you're going to get buttered up, not salvation. Whole, salvation meaning whole, full, connected self. As Dr. Myers has said, we are people that's been interested in holistic connections, different than butter.
Minutes, JoJo, Robina, Evan, takeaways you want to share?
Yeah, I gathered that I don't want to be buttered up. I'm not a little muffin, but I will say validates my cultural or religious and spiritual practices, because what I'm coming to understand is that all humans are not a monolith, and that variation is even more expansive within groups. So all Black people are not a monolith, and so I think we should never allow anyone to tell us if we're practicing our religion or spirituality too perfectly or too poorly.
Great.
I am not a muffin. We're gonna remember that one.
Yeah, my takeaway kind of connects to what something that you said about we are here, like we're still here. And for me, it brings to mind this phrase that I see people saying. I'm not sure who originally said it, but it's on shirts and stuff. But like, my existence is resistance. And so that's kind of what I think of, how deep that is to really think about, being a Black person and still being here. And then it also makes me think about something that Evan said earlier about how, some folks have used voodoo practices to like, I don't remember the word used, like lure out like transphobia and stuff. And so I'm thinking about how much I've learned from queer folks in the queer community and the way that they practice resistance just by expressing who they are. And I'm sure it's very tough for them to do that, because even religion, tries to stifle that or tell them that it's sinful or different things like that. But yeah, my big takeaway is what it is and how deep it is that we are here, regardless of what has happened to us, and that we will continue to be here.
Ashe. Evan?
I'm also not a muffin. Hashtag not a muffin. Hashtag Zola. And I think for me, really quickly, is I guess for me, this is a demonstration of the more we reach back into the past, like the clearer the future becomes, right? Like we can learn so much from these beliefs and religions and philosophies that I think are often thrown away as like antiquated, but they can help us actually build towards the future. And so for me, I think our conversations are always evidence of that. And really quickly, I also wanted to shout out, I don't know if we ever take the time to do this, but Dr. Helen Neville, who helps us so much with this whole thing. Yeah. And she's a freaking superhero. So I just wanted to do that real quick.
Great.
Dr. Helen, we love you. One of the things that comes to mind with me as we talked about religiosity and the Western mindset, and I think it was JoJo who mentioned something about the enslaved who jumped overboard rather than come. In their mind's eye, they weren't committing suicide simply because in their worldview, there is no death. It's just the recycling. And so in that realization, we just have to shift the way we think about things that we hear, things that we see, and try to come to a knowing that's consistent with the people that we're looking at. It's so very critical and essential, not only to ancient times, but most important today, because when we do that, that's when we can bring that love and acceptance and appreciation of those things we don't understand. We don't really know, but let's give one another the benefit of the doubt and be kind to one another. Much love. I think we're out of time. Sorry about that. I need to take up all the time.